Re-Zero, Volume 2, Chapter 4, Part 2, A Deadly Game of Tag. And so, his first week at Roswell Manor began in earnest for the third time. For this third loop, Subaru wanted to emphasize gathering information. My keywords are magic and chain, but that doesn't tell me anything yet. The only thing he knew for sure was that someone would attack in the dead of night on the fourth day. Under the present circumstances, if he told Roswell and the others, they'd no doubt ignore him. Subaru simply couldn't explain where he got his information. Subaru could even get himself suspected as one of the assassins arrayed against them. If he at least had a physical description of the attacker, things might be different, but that's why I gotta spend this time gathering intel, if the return by death conditions are the same as before. On the Royal Capital loop, he'd died 3 times and had a breakthrough on the 4th. If things were as before, he'd be able to return one more time, so this time he'd gather the intel he needed for a breakthrough the 4th time around. To be honest, I don't like picking a plan that's giving up from the start. However, his options being very limited, he had to resign himself to some sacrifices. At any rate, he had no intention of throwing away his opportunity. It was the difference between resolving to redo everything and aiming from the start to overcome the challenge. This time, he'd focus entirely on getting out of the loop. For that, I had to tell Puck under the table to keep Amelia safe. In the middle of playing around with Puck in the garden, Subaru whispered to Puck to pay attention to Amelia's surroundings. The little kitty could read minds. Subaru figured he'd know Subaru's earnestness was no lie. I'd made things pretty vague, but he seems generally protective of Leah. After all, he'd given Subaru's pushy suggestion a warm reception. He could now assume that Amelia would be relatively safe. It wasn't much, but it did relieve a bit of the burden on his shoulders. After that, there's Roswell and the lolly. But after that, what? Subaru scratched his head all over, plucked out a hair, pinched his feather pen under his nose, and stretched his back. His head hurt from the difficult dilemmas. That being said, he had to do whatever he could. If possible, he wanted Ram and Rem, and of course Roswell and Beatrice as well, to get through those 4 days safely. He had his reasons for not running, no matter how formidable the challenge. My concentration just ain't cutting it. What to do? Huh? As he leaned back against his chair, it made a creaking sound when he heard a voice from outside. "Pardon me, dear guest." Faster than Subaru could reply, the door opened and he saw a pink-haired maid, Ram. Subaru raised an eyebrow as Ram came in with a steaming cup sitting on a tray in her hands. "Oh my, dear guest, you really are studying." "That's super rude, you know. I am kind of an actual guest at the moment." "Dear guest, you are the manner of house guest known as a freeloader." Looking calm and composed, Ram led herself into the room and began serving tea. Watching from the side as she worked, Subaru could not conceal his bitter smile at her words. A house guest and a freeloader. He thought the terms fit all too well. "Here you go, dear guest." "Oh, thanks. Hot, hot, hot." When he took the cup and looked down into it, he saw steam rising from the surface of the hot amber liquid. The tea of this world was nearest to black tea in appearance and taste. The rich aroma was just as easy to enjoy. Ram's attitude was very blunt, but it was odd that she'd come in to serve tea like this. As he watched Ram's polished movements, Subaru slowly tasted the tea he'd been offered, nodding. Really does taste awful." "This manor serves tea using leaves of the highest quality, so that is quite a statement." "If it tastes bad, it tastes bad. You just can't think of it as anything but black tea. Tastes like plant." Ram coldly watched Subaru's scowling face as she served herself tea that she had brought like it was the most normal thing in the world, sitting down on the bed and stretching her legs without a care. "I don't have words for the guts you have, slacking off in front of a guest." "I believe you are the one who said to take it easier, dear guest. I am doing this only to respond to your request. You should be thanking me." This is, even pushier than you were before, though. Subaru voiced his complaints as he sank back in his chair and made a loud sound. Ram listened to that sound as she wet her tongue with black tea, finally giving Subaru a sideways glance. And dear guest, leaving in 2 days, have you made any progress? Subaru broke out in a small, bitter smile as he listened to her exceptionally dry delivery. It was already the second night since he had begun the third loop. For this third time around, Subaru had been treated at the mansion like a guest, a sharp difference from before. That was because Subaru had requested as much at that first breakfast. Now that he was being treated as a guest, Subaru had his own room, and Rem and Ram took turns serving him as he continued the language study he'd begun the last time. All of it was to justify his leaving the mansion temporarily without creating a stir. He was forming plans in his head while his fingers continued copying iScript almost automatically. His movements were robotic enough to make one's stomach twist, but nothing was really getting into his head. Are you always this bad, or is it your foolish head unable to concentrate? Got some nerve saying that to a literary enthusiast like me. Aren't you inspired from watching me give this desk my all back there? An uncouth statement to match such sloppy writing. I am aghast you call yourself a literary enthusiast, dear guest. This is the first time I've seen a maid talk to her guest like you do. Rem politely ignored Subaru's resentful statement and browsed with apparent interest the pages filled with characters. Even with the distance so close, he glared as he watched the side of her face, unable to stop the feeling that his insides were being wrung. Unlike the previous occasions when Subaru had been treated as a servant, he'd had little contact with Rem this time around. Beyond his time spent in pursuit of Amelia, he'd mainly stayed in his room writing characters like this, though once in a while he spared some time to go to tease Beatrice a little. So the distance between Rem and himself felt far greater than when he was treated as a servant. In spite of that, here was Ram visiting Subaru in his room, spending time with him and speaking to him like a very blunt friend. He couldn't help but find it strange. If you do not stop staring at me like that, I shall slap you, dear guest. Hey, the only one making the inside of my head go pink is Amelia. Oh, that's right. Trying to deflect his unease as he averted his eyes, he set aside the tea and picked up a book with its back cover facing up. This was the picture book he was using as learning material. He was finally able to understand the characters in it. In other words, I want to make all this studying feel like it got me somewhere. It contains only common stories you should be ashamed not to know. You need to master basic iScript before calling yourself a literary enthusiast. Does calling myself that take you off that much? Rem made no reply to Subaru's question as she poured the remaining contents of her cup down her throat. She then reached for Subaru's cup. Wait, you're gonna drink all the tea you brought here? You do not need it if you're making a face like that when you drink it. At least it shall be enjoyed by someone with a properly functioning tongue. I told you, I just can't get that plant taste out of my Oh, never mind. I'm gonna focus on this book so you can kill time or head off, whatever you want. Subaru made a brisk wave before leaning forward in his chair and opening the picture book. First came the author's preface and the table of contents. After that came the body, written in the characters he'd now grown accustomed to. Let's see. A long, long time ago. So fairy tales start the same way in every world, huh? He accepted with strange ease as he continued reading the story. The fact that it was a picture book meant the story was exceptionally concise, with a clearly defined introduction, body, and conclusion. Childlike comprehension was prioritized, with pictures used precisely where there was room for imagination. Incidentally, if one asked Subaru which fairy tale he liked best, he would reply, The Crying Demon. If one asked Subaru which fairy tale he hated most, he would reply, The Crying Demon. It's like a happy ending and a bitter ending slamming into you at once. Why can't it all be happily ever after?
Sorry to intrude your deep thoughts, but are you finished reading?
I'm finished reading. The things that went against common sense were fun, so it was more interesting than I expected. Guess that's another world's culture for you. Maybe I should bring in fairy tales from my own homeland, too, like The Crying Red Demon.
The Crying Red Demon?
Subaru was mumbling about the copyright issues in another world's jurisdiction when Ram's eyebrows trembled in response. Huh? Went Subaru, getting a rare rise out of Ram. It's the title of a fairy tale from where I come from. How about I tell it to you? Ram did not reply. Subaru made the suggestion with a thumbs up. However, the way she sat on the bed with her hands on her knees, shifting her gaze to Subaru, clearly conveyed that he should get on with it. All right, attention please. The Crying Red Demon. A long, long time ago, in a certain land, there was... The fairy tale began with a bitter argument. The Crying Red Demon was a tale of friendship between the Red Demon, which wanted to become friends with humans, and his best friend, the Blue Demon, and what came between them. It went something like this. The two demons, living on the mountain, tried various things to get the Red Demon in the good graces of the villagers, culminating in the Blue Demon committing wicked deeds upon the village, only to be driven off by the Red Demon, who thus befriended the human beings. The tale ended with the Blue Demon leaving. The Red Demon, dispirited at the Blue Demon's display of friendship, cried for the Blue Demon's sake. And so, the Red Demon read over and over the letter left at the Blue Demon's house and cried. The end. Subaru finished conveying to Ram a somewhat abridged version of the fairy tale. It was a fairy tale Subaru himself had read many times over. He thought he was as faithful with the words as possible, keeping his own opinions out of it. Ram lowered her eyes as she listened to the tale. Subaru stayed in the same position as when he'd finished the story, waiting for her to speak. Finally, Ram let out a small sigh.
A rather sad tale.
I suppose so, but I think it's a happy story, too.
I think the cast of characters was full of idiots. The Red Demon, the Blue Demon, and the villagers, too.
Well, that's being a tough critic. Not that you'll get any argument from me. He agreed that none of the three sides had enough introspection. The villagers were pure suckers, and if the two demons had spoken more to each other, they might have found proper common ground. At the very least, surely they could have avoided the need for one to put distance between him and the other for the rest of their lives. That's why I love the story and hate the story. The Blue Demon's self-sacrifice was super cool, but he was an idiot beyond saving, too. I like to think I can save myself through putting in the effort.
So, you think that the Blue Demon... I think it is the Red Demon who is beyond saving.
Ram's reply made Subaru lift his head. Ram was looking at Subaru as she bit her tongue.
He wrapped the Blue Demon in his own desires, losing nothing when the Blue Demon lost everything. I think that is rather a horrible result.
What do you think the two demons should have done then?
If the Red Demon truly wanted to be friends with the humans, he should have gone to live in the village, even if it meant cutting off his horn. He should have done that long before the Blue Demon left.
Man, that's a pretty extreme position there. Subaru raised his voice at the radical view she'd provided, but Ram simply stroked her own short hair like she was saying, "Is it now?" She proceeded to toy with the ribbon holding her hair in place.
Making the Blue Demon pay for something he wants is unforgivable. If the Red Demon wants it, the Red Demon should pay the price. The Blue Demon robbing him of that chance is a problem too.
That's a really strict view of it. Do you have something against demons?
Dear guest, which of the two demons would you rather befriend?
Subaru blinked at Ram's question. He hadn't really thought about it. Which of the two? Ram nodded and stretched out both hands towards Subaru, raising one finger for each.
On the one hand, the Red Demon who asks and leaves others to pay for the consequences, or the Blue Demon, the idiot drowning in his own martyrdom. Which?
Geez, you make both of those choices feel bad. So what, I'm a villager who just arrived here? It was rather rare for the point of view of the villagers to come up in a discussion about the crying red demon. Either way, Subaru was a little lost as he stared at the two hands Ram presented before him when she said, "What an uninteresting reply." "Don't say that. Since I've read The Crying Red Demon, I sympathize with the two of them, so I want to help out both, okay?" Subaru gently pressed both his hands onto both of Ram's hands. Subaru's reply drew a long sigh out of Ram. She glared at Subaru, who of course was close enough to touch. "So you're the type who understands neither his position nor that of others. When distance grows, your type gets left behind by both." Distance, huh? Why not just tell people how you feel while they're still close? The red demon's not a bad guy for wanting to get along, and the blue demon's not a bad guy for wanting to help him either. I'm the type who likes demons, not the type to just drive them off the island at the drop of a hat. Ram sighed at the grinning Subaru and looked at her own two hands as he grasped her raised fingers. As she brushed him off, Subaru shrugged and sat back in his seat, readjusting himself to face Ram again. "You know, Ram, you seem to like the Crying Red Demon quite a bit." "Dear guest, you will someday regret fickle, indecisive thoughts, such as wanting to be friends with both." "I don't remember that being what we were talking about here. I thought we were talking about demons." As Subaru shouted and shook his head, Ram made a small clap of her hands to indicate the subject was closed. Her quick-tempered behavior tugged at him, but Ram pointed to the book on the desk before he could say a word. "Setting aside tales from our dear guest's homeland, what do you think of the stories of this land?" "Let's see. I suppose the one that stood out was the dragon one in the middle of the book, and the witch one at the end. No matter how I slice it, those two are different somehow." Subaru gave a wandering reply as he browsed the book. Those were the two tales that had left the deepest impression upon him. The former definitely got special treatment. As for the latter, the witch story was like, they felt they had to put it in, but they went halfway. It completely ignored story structure, like a bunch of highlights. "That cannot be helped. We are in Lagunica. Of course the dragon story gets special treatment." Subaru nodded as he flipped the pages of the picture book on the desk. "Right. Dragon Friend Kingdom of Lagunica, right? Now I get why it's called that." Apparently, the large kingdom Subaru was staying in was called the Dragon Friend Kingdom of Lagunica. On world maps, it looked like the easternmost nation in the world, but apparently it had good reason to be called the Dragon Friend Kingdom. It was a simple tale, really. Long ago, the kingdom had come under the protection of a dragon, forming a pact. "The dragon is said to have lent its power to Lagunica, protecting it in times of famine, plague, war with other nations, and other various predicaments." "So that's why they call it Dragon Friend, huh? It did say in the picture book that the royal family made a pact with the dragon. This is less of a fairy tale than ancient history, right?" "I suppose so. It's a true story, after all. Even now, the dragon protects the peace of this land from under a great waterfall far away until the day it's promised to the royal family comes to an end." Subaru cleared his throat as he listened to the oh-so-strict Ram speak such words. A promise made with a dragon in ancient times. The picture book had not drawn the details, but it was a big enough deal that the kingdom had been saved from crisis many times over. Thinking of that, Subaru suddenly realized something about the royal family that made the pact with the dragon. Hey, the family that made the promise with the dragon, didn't it just die out?
"It did, and suddenly at that."
"Isn't that, bad? Not that I know what bad means here." No doubt the dragon had been promised something considerable in return for protecting its promise all that time. Yet with the royal family, that would be granting it dying off on him like that. Who would honor that obligation? Ram began.
"No one knows what the dragon seeks, so it was not put in the picture book. Only gods know what the dragon will do in this situation."
At that point, Ram paused for a moment.
Rather, dear guest, only the dragon knows.
Subaru's breath caught. He wasn't warm, but he felt sweat on his brow regardless. He chewed over Ram's words, swallowed them, and breathed in and out hard enough to make his stomach churn. Negotiating with the mighty dragon was the responsibility of the ruler of the kingdom. In other words, that has to be a mountain of pressure on Amelia, then.
Yes, the dragon can protect the kingdom or destroy it on a whim. Thus, the kingdom and its destiny rest upon Amelia's shoulders. Just thinking about it makes it seem like a story from that picture book.
There'd been a conflicted look on Amelia's face when she saw the picture book on the last night of the previous loop. Now Subaru understood why Amelia's hands had stopped when she was flipping the pages. The size and weight of Amelia's burden had far surpassed Subaru's expectations. His mind wanted to cry out just from thinking about the heavy responsibility borne by those delicate shoulders.
It cannot be helped.
Huh?
Everyone was born with a role to play, and the responsibility to live up to it. This is what Lady Amelia was born to do. It is a path that she must walk, no matter how treacherous it may be.
Subaru's voice was shaking with anger from a source he couldn't place. One girl supposed to shoulder the whole burden like that? For her part, Ram's voice was cold and logical.
I believe it is best if others can carry it with her. However, sooner or later, Lady Amelia must be seen to climb that summit herself.
Subaru slumped his shoulders when he realized Ram was holding back not to fuel his anger further. He could vent at Ram all he wanted, but he'd been mistaken. Ram wasn't responsible for the weight of Amelia's burden. At any rate, Subaru had no right to be angry. That part really burdened him. Oh, right. Ram, about the other story. Wanted to do something other than apologize. Subaru changed the subject and pointed at the picture book. Contrary to how the story of the dragon in the center of the book had received special treatment, the story of the witch had only a few pages drawn for it at the very back of the book. The story was titled The Witch of Jealousy. So, this witch story.
I do not wish to speak of it.
Just like that, she seemed to verbally cut things off after the story of the dragon. Subaru opened his eyes wide, without thinking, as Ram briskly got up, tray and cups in hand.
I have been here too long. I do not wish to cause Rem too much trouble. Dear guest, I shall call you again for dinner time.
Right. Ram, turning her back like she would brook no argument, immediately headed out of the room. But just before her hand reached the door, Ram stopped and looked back at Subaru, left in her dust.
About the demon story from earlier.
Right. The crying demon. What of it?
Don't tell Rem that story. She would probably find it distasteful.
Surely no one would have that kind of reaction over a simple fairy tale. Regardless, Subaru, feeling overwhelming pressure from Ram's words, could only nod meekly in response. Seeing this, Ram finally left. Subaru, feeling drained, flopped onto the bed. It felt there was something more to Ram's last action than just banning him from telling Ram a fairy tale. What the heck's up with all that? Venting at the ceiling, Subaru picked up the picture book and flipped through the pages. The final chapter, The Witch of Jealousy, was a short tale, only 4 pages long. A scary witch, a frightening witch. It is terrifying to just speak her name. That was why everyone called her the Jealous Witch. There was no story structure, just contents conveying the raw terror of the witch. It was straight up eerie, doubtedly so when written in characters meant for small children. And after all the trouble of studying to read this thing, his feelings of success, satisfaction, and the glow of having just read a book seemed to fall by the wayside. Subaru turned in bed and switched his head to a different subject, thinking of what he could do for the remaining 2 days of that loop. He'd put his preparations for the last day in order, and shifted to what he'd do 2 mornings hence. Subaru squished his countless worries one by one until he finally fell asleep.